our goal is to inform further discussions of chassis management at ports to better facilitate decision-making regarding chassis operations. The chassis is the trailer that holds the container and attaches it to the truck. It's highly related to the container. When there is a high volume of containers at the port, it also means that there's a high demand for chassis. So it's important to ensure that there's a good number of availability of chassis in order to allow for the mobility of containers. Because the ocean carriers owned the chassis, they were able to store the chassis at the terminals, but when truckers delivered a container, they would have to return the chassis to the terminal. It led to many non-revenue generating trips for truckers, and it limits the number of revenue generating trips, known as turns, that a driver can make in any given day. It also results in real estate shortages. It is difficult to store these chassis on the ports, so there had to be a better way to manage chassis, and that is the traditional model which I described, where the ocean carriers were the owners, and the pool of pools. What the pool of pools is a multi-pool agreement between two or more third-party equipment managers, each with its own pool. Overall, this was to increase chassis efficiency and availability. This pool of pools has been identified as a good short-term solution, but not efficient enough for the long term.
We're interested in port drayage disruptions, which are disruptions at the port and short-range trucking industry. Basically, what happened is that these truckers are on strike because they're independent contractors and they're facing these environmental fees, but environmentalists want to raise the fees. We're primarily interested in the relationship between interventions and disruptions. One small disruption at a port could lead to cascading effects across the whole national supply chain and the whole national economy, as well as affecting just the local economy. We're able to look at this from a policy perspective for looking at effects of the trade war, tariffs, and coronavirus. So the methodology we use is we ran several logistic regression models, some of them with fixed effects. We're looking at what variables increase the log likelihood of a disruption. Larger port cities have a lower likelihood of disruptions than smaller port cities. We see a decreased likelihood in disruptions from municipally controlled ports. This is kind of where the future of this project is going to be going, is we want to see how the causality and kind of the timeline of these interventions and disruptions interact. We also see with our time fixed effect that ports that are in more recent years have an increased likelihood of disruptions. And then we also saw that smaller port cities are more likely to face these disruptions.
I'll give you an overview of what it takes to build a regional microsimulation model. The overall process can be broken down into these four main categories: study area, data refinement, optimization, and validation. We believe it allows us to model and try to understand issues that may be too complex to fully capture by a numerical or analytical model. We are able to capture not only issues at the network level, but provided by the interactions with other vehicles in the network. Once it's built, it can be easily updated and modified to test infrastructure improvement projects or the deployment of new technologies in the future. For the selection of freeways, we looked at data from the truck activity monitoring system. What this system basically does is classifies vehicles on truck-only lanes using existing infrastructure such as loop detectors or weight in motion sensors. Some of the lessons learned is that, of course, a macrosimulation model is as accurate as the amount of work that you put into it, and it's a process of checking and rechecking the data and making changes as you go. Some of the opportunities that we see for this model is to model vehicle autonomy, vehicle connectivity by the use of cooperative adaptive cruise control, and with all of these changes that we could model, another use of the outputs of microsimulations is that we have second trajectories for all of these vehicles with speeds and acceleration, so we could model the environmental effects, the tailpipe emissions associated with those changes.